Oh, well,
Hi.
thanks for inviting me, Judy.
Sure, sure. So I was pretty excited to see that you actually have a Wikipedia. So
Oh, yeah, I've
yeah,
noticed
did
that.
you know? Oh, okay. Yeah, so who put that up there?
I don't know, actually.
Oh,
It just appeared. So professionally, I'm, as Judy said, I'm professor at Yale School of Public Health. I'm the director for the Center of Infectious Disease Modeling and Analysis at Yale. And I have an endowed chair in epidemiology. I'm also, my most important job is being mom to three beautiful kids, Sarah, Evan, and Emily, and also married to my husband, Jeff. And we have three dogs in addition to the three kids.
wow, that must keep you very busy. How do you even have time to learn about true crime?
Well, mostly when I'm watching or listening to true crime, I'm multitasking. It's usually when I'm like doing laundry and washing dishes, cooking, that I have it up. So with the multitasking, it doesn't necessarily take time out of the day.
Because if you have to fold laundry, you might as well listen to something. Yeah. So I guess what we wanted to focus on today was what happened with your mother back in 1982. So if anything is too disturbing to talk about, feel free to just let me know.
Okay, so maybe I'll just give a little bit of background about their relationship. So they met in New York City, and my father was like an investment consultant, and my mother, well, the time she was getting her master's in social work at Fordham when they met, and they got married. I think within the year they were married, and they moved to San Francisco, which is where I was born. And when I was 5, well, probably for the last year of the marriage, there was, I'd say, a lot of fighting and violence. And like, for instance, and this is pertinent, especially given her cause of death. One time I remember it was particularly bad. I went into their bedroom, and my father was straddling my mother, like pinning her arms down with his knees, and he had a pillow over her face, this big, like, Laura Ashley pillow that she had made. She had sewed herself, and I was like begging him, to stop doing that. And he would lift the pillow up and put it back down. Anyway, he did stop, but that, and well, in her diary, which I now have, that, and I guess a similar incident and just other violence triggered her to file for divorce. And that, so she filed for divorce when I was 5. She waited until the summer, like when I was out of school for the summer. And then my mother and I moved into, well, what was then termed a battered women's shelter, and filed for divorce. So during just the next couple of months, there was, some negotiations. The divorce was never finalized before she was murdered, but I was with her for a couple months, just her. And then the temporary agreement was that I was going to spend weekends with him. And the first weekend I spent with him, his mother came into town, and he enrolled me in a different school in San Francisco and told me not to tell her. And I did end up going to that school. In retrospect, is particularly odd. Sorry, that sounds very important detail. Anyway, so on the second weekend I spent with him was the weekend when she was murdered. And what was particularly unusual was she dropped me off I guess on Friday, and then she was supposed to pick me up Monday morning. I still wasn't in school, so it was like the full weekend. She was supposed to pick me up Monday morning. And when he already had me, this is in her diary and in addition to memories that I had. Well, I heard him on the phone talking to his uncle, who has the same name, Patrick. So to Uncle Pat, asking if I could go spend the night, Sunday night, with him. And it still like struck me as very unusual because we hadn't spent that much time with that uncle. He was an elderly man. I'd, never spent a night alone with him. And also this was just the second weekend I'd seen my father like all summer. And so then when he got off the phone, and he hadn't talked to me about it before, I just like heard him on the phone. When he got off the phone, I said, I don't want to do that. I don't want to spend the night, and I don't want to go, I don't want to go there at all. And my father said to me, well, just go. And now that I've arranged it, just go there and you don't have to spend the night. Yeah. Meanwhile, the part that I didn't know until later on, he called my mother and said that she needed to come Sunday evening. I think it was 8 p.m. He asked her to come to pick me up instead of Monday morning. Like, she wrote this in her diary. She told a number of friends, and she said to him, well, I'm like co-hosting a taco party. Are you sure I can't? Can you bring her here? Or can I? And he said, no, you have to. She wrote in her diary that he said, no, if you want her, you have to come get her. And so she left the taco party, and, she told, like, there's multiple witness statements. It was a party. There were several people. Then, she said, oh, I have to go get my baby. I have to go get Allison. I'll be right back. And it's just like a 7-minute drive. Her car, her yellow Buick, was seen outside my father's house at least two neighbors saw the car around. That was consistent with her going there around 8. They saw it, a bit after 8. And she never returned to the party. Her friends were concerned about her because they knew that her estranged husband was violent and had a temper. And she had even characterized, for instance, that time with the smothering that I had witnessed as like an attempted murder. And so they were really worried about her. So meanwhile, she disappeared that night. So remember, I'm at Uncle Pat's house, and it was getting later and later, like darker and darker. And I was feeling, expecting my father to pick me up. And then my father called Uncle Pat and said he couldn't come pick me up. I didn't talk to him on the phone, but Uncle Pat told me that my father said his car had broken down. And I said, well, can he take a taxi to pick me up? Because I really didn't want to spend the night there. And he said, Uncle Pat just said, well, just kind of some nonsense, like, oh no, he needs to stay with the car to make sure nothing happens to it. And that car, by the way, he did pick me up the next day in that car, in the silver Mercedes. Yeah, which is also just, there's a lot of
rough lines.
Yeah. So anyway, my father picked me up that would have been the Monday morning. I was still thinking that my mother was going to pick me up Monday morning, because I didn't know my father had called and tried to, told her to come Sunday. I was already, at his uncle's house. And, she didn't come. And then, so although we didn't find this out till the end of the week.
But during this time, you were just 5 years old, right?
Yeah.
Just 5. So it's incredible how much you remembered. But it's also kind of interesting that your mom happened to have a diary that you found. Did your father give you it?
Oh, no, the police had it. The
Oh,
police, because they went and collected her things where she and I had been living, and she had
yes.
her diary there. Like my father, I don't think he knew she had that diary, and
Oh, okay.
I just got a copy of it from the police in adulthood.
Oh, okay. Yeah,
Um,
because I was just wondering, I was like, what, your father saved a diary or something? So
yeah, no, he never
that
had the
explains it.
diary. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what happened was her body was found the next morning, as it turned out. She had been strangled. She was stripped of her clothing except her underwear. Although she wasn't sexually assaulted, well, there was some blunt force trauma and strangulation, and then she was wrapped in the sleeping bag that had been in the trunk of her Buick. So we know without a doubt that the killer had access to the Buick. And then it was the whole her body in the sleeping bag was then like bound with rope and weighted down with cinder blocks, and her body was thrown over a bridge, not the Golden Gate Bridge, another bridge in the bay though. So yeah, in the San Francisco San Mateo Bay, her body was thrown over. And I think, my father started those first few days, he was trying to make out that my mother had just like decided to, abandon me, to leave. It was too much. And that's what
Oh,
I think he was expecting, hoping that her body would never be found, and that, oh, she just skipped town. I remember him saying like, oh, women sometimes do that when they're going through a divorce. But anyway, her body was actually found within 24 hours. So we know she was, last seen Sunday evening, and then her body was found Monday morning by fishermen. Basically, my father had not used enough cinder blocks, or for whatever reason, like the body didn't really sink. And
oh,
some fishermen, I think it was actually just like hobby fishermen. I think it was like a school teacher and his son found her body the next morning. But
oh,
but at that point, she was unidentified. And so, but a sketch, the police released a sketch of, and it was, in the San Francisco Chronicle and the San Francisco Examiner. I don't know if that still exists, but and her friends, who had been really, concerned that she hadn't returned, they saw the sketch. Then they called my father and said, these particular people that called him didn't know him, but they were calling, still asking, Nancy said she was coming there to get Allison. Did she come there? Like, where is she? And he said, oh no, she never came. And they're like, well, there's a sketch in the newspaper that looks like her, of a woman that's been murdered. He still didn't report her to the police. And there was a sketch the next day again. And her friends called the police at this point. I guess they called him a second time and also said, like, if you don't report her missing, we will. And he said, okay, I'll report. They did report her missing then. So he, on the Thursday, I actually went with him. He went to, we walked into just like a local precinct, and he read, well, I sat on like this wooden bench. This part I know because like I've seen more recently, and but he read from a legal page, like information, which like the police officer noted. This is how I know it, because like in the police report, that it was really odd that someone would come in and like read, details of when they last saw their wife from a piece of paper.
yeah, like he had it all planned out, what he
Yeah,
was going to say. Yeah,
yeah,
that's suspicious. Yeah.
yeah.
But when he first told you that maybe your mom just ran off, did you cry, or what was your reaction?
I I actually said to him that I thought she was dead then. I didn't think she would abandon me. And so I didn't, although I certainly didn't think it didn't cross my mind that he had killed her, but I thought she was dead. Like, and I was saying, oh, I think she's dead. I think she's dead. And he was saying, no, I don't think she's dead. She's just gone off and this happens.
Was he also claiming that your mom had mental problems?
Oh yeah, he did. The first night I was back, so it would have been Monday night. I was back with my father. In the middle of the night, I heard a car being driven into the driveway, and I looked out, and it was my mom's Buick being driven in. And I somehow knew it wasn't her because it was just like very odd. It was driving very slowly. And I went to my father's room and he wasn't there. And I just remember being terrified. And I didn't think like, oh, yay, my mom's here. Like I just somehow knew that was all, that there was something very disturbing happening. Again, although not still thinking it was my father driving the car. His mother comes into town during that week. I know this is all this happened before like the Saturday when the police then did come to our house. So it's hard for people to follow, but basically, so we went on I guess it was a Thursday. He reported her, he made some odd statements to the police as well. Like apparently they asked like, oh, could she have like left out of town? Does she have money? Does she have access to money? And he said like, oh, well, when she gets, because they have these two properties in San Francisco, which they had bought at a really favorable time, and they had a lot of equity in them. And he said, oh, well, when she gets the house, like one of the two houses, because they were next to each other. Like one was a duplex where we lived, and then the other was like a 4-5 unit. It was actually 5-unit. Eventually ended up being 5-unit building next door. So they own the two, apartments next to each other, which is it's pertinent to the movement of these cars. Sorry, maybe I'm getting too sidetracked about the cars at the moment. But okay. So
well, here's a detail I think I heard you say, or maybe it was in one of the news articles. Didn't they show you a picture of the blanket that your mom was wrapped in, and you recognized it as the picnic blanket you two had recently sat on for a picnic, right? The green blanket with cranes or something.
Yeah, exactly. So it wasn't they showed me a picture. So that was when I then, as an adult start suspecting my father. I contact the police, and they did another series of interviews with me. And in one, they asked me, to describe everything I could remember. And they asked me about like the Buick, and that sleeping bag was always in the trunk, and we would use it. It was primarily in the trunk. We'd like use it for picnics in Golden Gate Park. And I described it. I hadn't seen it since I was 5, but I described it, including the birds, as you just said. And even though I hadn't seen it at that point in like more than 20 years, and without showing me the picture, they said that's like really, they were astonished that like I could remember the detail of the sleeping bag, and that she had been wrapped and that it had been her Buick. So like that's one of the confirmations. Like the police were struck about how much I remembered that that they had from the original investigation. That's just I think I have such a good memory for these things because the trauma like encapsulated the memories. And because these things were also unusual as well, and they're trying to kind of make sense of them. But then, so the Saturday, after, so he reports her missing on the Thursday. The Saturday, so this is within the less than a week from when like her body been found when she was last seen. The police came to my father's apartment, and his mother was, had come into town. Oh, I should step back. About the Buick, because when my grandmother came in, I told her that my mother's Buick was in the car. My mother's Buick was in the garage. And she said, what? That doesn't make any sense. And I was like, insisting, yes, I saw it go in. Like in the middle of the night, I could see the rear of it going in. And then my grandmother, my father's mother, said to Alison, saying the Buick's in the garage. And then they went down and looked, and it was there. And the police found it there, which I can come to like his explanations later about why it was there, but that itself is incredibly incriminating. We know the murderer had the Buick. Just to make clear, like my mother was not living at that house where the Buick, at my father's house at that time. We'd moved, and she only like had driven there to pick me up. And so it has always perplexed me about, why he brought it back to his house.
Maybe he was so cheap he wanted to make sure he could sell it.
That's well, when I asked him about it in the I eventually had a recorded interview with the police. He said, well, it was his car, it was in his name. Both the cars were in his name, so it was his. And like, oh, she probably like just wanted to return it to him because it was his. But you know what? He didn't sell the Buick. He sold his Mercedes and drove that Buick for years after. So no matter how you look at it, is disturbing, because even if he's not the killer, he still knows the killer had that car.
That's very suspicious. I mean, how would he even know where the car was?
Yeah.
Plus the fact that she was found wrapped in the sleeping bag that was kept in the trunk.
In the trunk. Exactly.
Yeah,
so it's not so exactly. If it hadn't been for that, we wouldn't necessarily know the killer had like come into contact with the car. Like it's possible she could have driven to the house and then, he wasn't home, so she walked away or whatever. And then someone else, killed her. Although that's kind of far-fetched, even that. But we know that the killer got it was a locked trunk too. Like, yeah, he would have had to use the key to get the sleeping bag out. And what it seems actually is that that first night, he parked the Buick in the house that they owned next to where he was living. So this is kind of complicated, but because of these were actually, this is from the 80s. Well, the cars were actually from the 70s, but it's 1982. So these are like, big cars. And my mother generally parked her Buick when we lived there in the house we were living in. And then the like apartment building they owned next door, my father parked his Mercedes. And they were just like 2-car garage. And the other car like had to be really small. So like if they had a tenant that had they had tenants with a small car, they could fit, but like their 2 cars were pretty wide, so they both wouldn't fit in one of the garages. And so that's why they had that arrangement. And some of the tenants said that particular night, instead of seeing the Mercedes where it would normally be, they saw the Buick. So some people saw the Buick first, like earlier in the evening, like in the driveway of his house. Then later on, later in the evening, and I think even into like the next day, tenants saw her Buick in the garage next door to where he was living, but the house they also owned. And then, it also made sense with if he then, because the police found it in his house. So that actually made everything fall into place for me, because I was like, I don't really understand how I had this memory of but it seems like he waited until not the night that he killed her, but the following night when I was back with him to switch the cars around. And I don't know why he did that. Maybe he, like, that doesn't, I don't know why he didn't originally put the Buick in his, that's what he ended up doing the next day. Or if he was just like trying to figure out what to do with the car. I don't know.
Yeah, but that is such an indicator of guilt. Like if he had nothing to do with it, then how did he even know where her car was? Is it such a priority to go look for your estranged wife's car when she's missing? If he didn't know who she was.
And all these movement of the cars, it even is more incriminating because, he's also the only person, I mean, besides my mom, like not even the tenants, that had keys to like both of the houses and both the garages. And if he's like moving the cars back and forth between the two garages, like that further indicates that it could only have been him. So anyway, the police then come. My father still didn't know, well, until the police came to our house, that my mother had been connected with the sketch. Like when he went to report her missing, he didn't mention, even though people were calling him saying she looks like the sketch in the newspaper, he didn't say, because he didn't want that connected up, right? He didn't say, oh, and I saw a sketch that looks like my wife in the paper. So it was because his, her friends were calling saying, I think that's Nancy. She left, explain the circumstances that we just went through. And then the police came to our house. They already had a search warrant, and they asked to speak to him. He refused to speak to them. They asked to search the house and he refused. And then they said, well, we have a search warrant. I think that police often do that. They ask for permission. Even if they have a search warrant, you may as well ask for permission initially. And they searched the house. They talked to me in my bedroom, and one of the detectives. There was a whole team of detectives. And I'm not sure if when they came to the door, they had a warrant for his arrest, but they arrested him by the end of their visit. That's like, all I know is he was arrested like that day. So they searched the house. They found, so people at that party had described what she was last wearing. And I've seen the descriptions, they're very detailed. It's not just like the color of like her shirt. It's like the purse that she had wearing, like the pants, the shirt, like multiple items. And also they're not like exactly the same. It's like one will describe it as like, olive green, and the other person will describe it as like greeny brown, or, something like, they weren't quite, but you could see, oh no, these are people describing the same color, the same outfit. And it was very recent. It was just like from a couple, from the people, from her friends describing her outfit, like that was just very fresh in their memory. Anyway, they found those clothes at his house. They might have found some other things, but they at least found that. And the Buick, of course. Like he didn't call and say the Buick is here, so they found her car there. And
everything sounds so suspicious. It's like, why did they let him go? He's found with her clothes too. I mean, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So why do you think they let him go then?
I mean, he said, oh, those aren't her clothes. They were mistaken. Like that's just, there's like, they just found.
There's just random clothes that happen to look like what your deceased estranged wife was last wearing.
Yeah.
In his house.
Yeah. I mean, I guess like, cause not that, I mean, I'm totally with you, but it's like, well, there were other of her clothes there too. And I think, and I don't, to this day, I don't know where in the house they were found. I was wondering, like, why did he keep the clothes? But then I thought, the trash is only picked up once. This just occurred to me very recently. The trash only picked up once a week in San Francisco, or at least then it was. And I was thinking, like, maybe, for all I know, maybe they was in the trash bin, you know, and they just hadn't been collected. But on the other hand, he might have not. He might have just hung it up in her closet. I don't know, but because obviously he thought it was not suspicious to have the Buick. So
Yes.
so they did arrest him, and I saw him being let out in handcuffs. Because I also had a bedroom with the windows, which is why I saw her car coming into the garage in the middle of the night. Windows looking the street. I saw him, being escorted into a police car with handcuffs. And I asked my grandmother, like, why is he in handcuffs? She said, oh, they always just do that. And because police talk to a lot of like dangerous people, so they just put everyone in handcuffs. And his sister, who was, she just retired, but she was a very, you had heard of the firm. She was, at the time she was,
Prof.
yeah, she was a lawyer
Yeah.
at Bass. And she came to, which is a prestigious firm in New York City. I mean, I think they have offices in multiple places now, but
Yes,
she was
definitely.
in New York. Yeah. She came into town and like helped started organizing his defense. Although there was all this strong evidence, he said, and his lawyers argued that, well, he never talked to the police. So he didn't say it's police, but he told like his lawyers, like including his sister, well, Alison was with me, and they argued like to the court after he'd been arrested, well, there's no way that he could have committed this murder in like a duplex apartment with me there. And so, that's why my channel is called My Father's Alibi, because I was his alibi. And the police, even though they had talked to me, and my uncle having the same name as my father, Pat, like that. Oh, and the police did note in their report that I called my mother like mommy, but I called my father, I referred to him as Pat. And so like there was just confusion. They thought I was with him that night.
That's horrible. Like a total misinterpretation of things.
Yeah.
Just because your uncle had the same name.
I know.
So,
yeah, exactly. And I mean, they still thought he was, because of this other evidence, the police still strongly believed he was guilty, and, he was arrested. And, but then the charges were dropped. Sorry, I should step back. So he did get bail. I mean, at the time, I didn't know he was out on bail. I just, like, I've seen newspaper articles since then. Like, all I knew, I saw him being arrested, even though I wasn't even told that he was arrested. But, I saw him in handcuffs, and then he was gone for a couple of days, and my aunt came out, and then he was back home. And as it turned out, I think because I've since, many, many years later, I saw the newspaper article. I think it was like the murder occurred in August, and so his arrest occurred in August. I think it was like December. They decided to drop the charges when he's been out on bail like this whole except for a few days. After a few days, then he's out on bail for until the charges were then dropped. And the police said to the reporter, it was in the article, that they disagreed with, they thought the charges should be still pursued. And the prosecutor said, we're not saying that he didn't do it. We're just saying we think there's a less than 50% chance that we'll win the case, which is our criteria for going forward. So it wasn't like a vindication either. But I guess that's much of the story around her death.
Yeah, That's just so frustrating. And then meanwhile, I think you said somewhere that you felt protective of your dad and you thought, he was a great guy, right?
Well, I
Is
was
that your opinion?
extremely attached to him. And I think, because my mother was, had been, not only did she die, but she died in such a sudden way. I had this almost like constant anxiety that like he would die and I'd be completely alone. There was that uncle, but like we basically hardly ever saw him again. And there was no other family in town. So I didn't have any siblings. And he was my whole world. He was, this may sound perplexing how I absolutely idolized him. But I mean, he hadn't been violent to me until after my mother's death. He'd been violent to her, but then after she died, like he would then lose his temper and be very violent with me. But then he would like flip. Most of the time he seemed very meek and in fact like kind of idolizing of me. And then every once in a while he loses temper and just be incredibly violent, and then but then flip back, apologize and flip back into his sort of meek, what I thought was loving parent.
Yeah, and you did say to me earlier that your mother had no siblings either. What about her parents? Were they still alive?
So her father, she had no siblings, and her father had died when she was in college. So her father, was dead by the, she didn't have, father advocating for her. And her mother was still alive then. And her mother actually did think my father did it, as it turned out. But she also, I don't know, they had a kind of, I guess, an unusual relationship as well. My mother, she moved from Texas to California to LA when she was 15 to be a nanny for a family. And like, especially now that I have kids that are, I have a 15-year-old, I have a 17-year-old, a 15-year-old, and a 13-year-old. I just can't imagine like letting one of them go off to like work basically as like
take care of little kids.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that she wasn't very close with her mother. And like for instance, I did ask her mother, like, years later when I started to think he was guilty, and she, she said that she agreed he was guilty, like why she hadn't tried to like get custody of me. And she said, oh, well, I thought that he had killed Nancy, her daughter, to get custody of you, and that if he loved you that much, he would be good to you, which is just, it's so perverse and upsetting, that she.
Yeah, to think like, hey, where's grandma? I mean, did she ever come and visit you or try to talk to you more about your mom?
Yeah, so I did, I did see her. She did visit occasionally. Initially, I wasn't allowed to talk to her, and I went down to, again, they had this apartment building. There were like quarters and from the apartment building, and I collected the quarters, and I went down to this is on Green Street in San Francisco. I went down to like Union Street and just a block down, and there were a lot of payphones there. And I called my grandmother in Texas. I got her number out of like my father's, address book, and I called her, and she was really, happy to hear from me, and it made me feel so happy that I did the same thing again the next day. And that second phone call, she said to me, "Now don't become a nuisance." And I still like that.
That's strange.
Yeah, I still feel just heartbroken, like thinking about how she said that to me. Yeah, but at the same time, it's not that, she did then visit. She would get like invitations from the school for like Grandparents' Day, and I probably saw her maybe like 4 or 5 years later, and she then started sending money as well. And my father's a really greedy person, and so after she started sending a lot of money, then he like let me talk to her, and so she was financially generous, and she paid for my college, for instance.
That's nice.
Yeah, so she just emotionally was very detached. Like I still find like her perplexing.
So she was in Texas at the time?
Yes.
You were in California. Oh, and you had also mentioned that your father decided to send you away to boarding school when you were 11.
Yeah.
Yes. So how did you feel about that?
Well, actually initially he said, "Oh, he's like, oh, I think, education is better in England, and I'll send you to this school and you just get established. And then I'm going to move from San Francisco to England," which he never did. But but I was really homesick the first year. And like, I was desperately homesick, but then I got used to it. And, many people have pointed out that it probably was, given he was abusive and such a toxic person, that might have been a blessing in disguise to have been sent to boarding school. I did still return during so I still saw him, several months out of the year, like, in the summers and all the holidays. But I went from like British boarding school to then Oxford University, and I did my PhD DPhil at Oxford as well.
It's very impressive. Yeah. But during this time that you were growing up, what did you think happened to your mother?
Well, I really didn't know, and I thought it was unknowable, and I certainly didn't think it was my father. And when I asked him, he would say things like, "Oh, it was probably a serial killer who was killing prostitutes, and she was a whore, so that's like probably she was killed by a serial killer." And I don't know if I exactly believed that. It just oh, and he told me, whoever that person was he was referring to, like, oh, but he went to prison for, I mean, maybe that person was just imaginary, but like, oh, he went to prison for other murders, of sex workers. Yeah, those are words I wouldn't use. I'm just using his words. And Yeah, and he said also because we were living in the Tenderloin like neighborhood, she had taken me to live in the Tenderloin. That that's such a dodgy area. That and she was taking drugs, and which wasn't true. So basically, whenever I asked any questions, he would say such hurtful things about her that I just I essentially stopped asking. Oh, about the car, he said he was being in the police recorded phone call, he said, the person was, she probably just tried to return the car to him. But other times he had said that the car was in his garage because someone was trying to frame him.
Right. Okay. Okay. So ultimately, based on the articles I've read, it looks like you didn't really suspect him until 2008. Some sort of odd conversation that you had with him.
Yeah, I probably around when I started my graduate work, I was just becoming increasingly uncomfortable with him. But I still didn't think he had, had killed my mother. But I'm just kind of explaining the evolution. Like, by the time I got married to my husband, which was when I was 27, I couldn't tolerate the idea of being like walked down the aisle with my father. And I asked him like if he'd go in front. I didn't want to hurt his feelings either, though. Like, I felt there was something wrong with me. I didn't think like, oh, maybe what's the origin of my discomfort is that, he was abusive, and that, in the back of my mind, these things I've been told don't make sense. And I wasn't familiar with the term narcissism until like my therapist much later pointed out to me that things could be resolved with, like, I thought, oh, he loves me so much because he was like so proud of me. But he was, he just everything fits into place when you like have a better understanding of narcissism. Anyway, so without like knowing that term, I just had these feelings about him, and was like just even physically uncomfortable with him. So yeah, as I mentioned, we got married when I was 27, and this one when we moved to. So Jeff and I met at Berkeley. I know you went to Berkeley, so
yeah, great school. Yeah. So how long were you there?
So after finishing my PhD, I did a postdoctoral as Miller Fellowship, Miller Endowment at Berkeley, and my husband Jeff had the same fellowship, so we started like postdocs together at Berkeley. And the fellowships were actually 3 years, but we ended up getting faculty jobs together in Connecticut after 2 years. And yeah, Judy and I have talked previously about like how difficult it is to get the two body problem in academia, to get jobs together, even in the same geographic region as each other, So originally he got a job at University of Connecticut, and I got the job that I still have at Yale School of Public Health. And then actually subsequently, then a job opened up in his area at Yale, and Jeff is now professor at Yale as well. Anyway, so yeah, we got married like our last week in Berkeley was getting married in the Bay on a boat, and then we moved to Connecticut, and then our first daughter Sarah was born 2 years later. So I just turned 30. And it was when, I think one way that I well, there was a confluence of things then that happened when I had Sarah. I, in the past, I told myself, and I genuinely thought I'd never know who killed her, if it was a serial killer person or what. And I had also just tried as far as possible to like compartmentalize that and focus on, my father really cared about me getting good grades. I really was focused on that. But then, after I had Sarah, like all the kind of grief for my mother started like rushing back in. And I felt her loss more strongly when I became a mother than I mean, maybe in a sense than I had since her death. I wished I had been able to talk to her, about like, but just even all the practical things of when you first have a baby and you're trying to breastfeed and all that.
Exactly. That's what moms are supposed to be there for, to help you.
Yeah.
Have the baby.
Yeah. And then also because I loved Sarah more than like I thought it was possible to love someone, I realized, oh my gosh, my mother probably loved me like this much. And I was so just, and also then on top of it all, I was sad to think like that Sarah would never be able to meet my grandmother. So it just felt like multiple layers of loss kind of all at once. And then plus I had, over the years, I had accepted things my father had said. I had normalized his violence, and I had even normalized like that incident where he was like smothering her with the pillow. He had told me, oh, he just did that because she was like screaming so loudly. He had to quiet her down so she wouldn't disturb the neighbors. Oh, by the way, the neighbors do report like hearing a lot of like violence, and like they report like hearing me crying when the violence going on.
So sad.
But yeah, and my father, like, he even like led me to believe like, oh, the only reason she was like divorcing him is because she had mental health issues and she was paranoid because she was telling people that she thought like he was gonna kill her, and well, like he did kill her, so I don't think it's really paranoia. So I had even accepted that, like, oh, I don't know why she was divorcing my father, and I didn't think he was a bad husband. But then as soon as I had my own baby, I felt like, oh my gosh, if my husband smothered me in front of my child, like, absolutely you should divorce your husband. So that it gave me a new perspective on that violence. And I also a new perspective on the violence and kind of narcissism that my father had. Again, I still didn't really know that term, but the violence that my father had been with me, because I just thought like I just wanted to protect my baby, and I couldn't imagine like ever being violent. And I told myself, because I know there's like repetition over generations, like if you've been physically abused as a child, like your mind can go to that when you lose your temper with your children. So I said, okay, I'm going to make a rule myself. I'm never going to spank them. I'm never going to, because if I do it once, I just have to make the rule under no circumstances. So yeah, it just gave me a new perspective about how these things have been normalized that shouldn't have been normalized. And then because I was thinking so much about her, and I still had all those memories that I described to you, but I had just suppressed them and tried not to think about them together. And then when I thought of everything I knew together, I'm like, this is just incredibly suspicious. It makes no sense why her Buick would be in his car. It doesn't make sense that if a serial killer had killed her, the serial killer, that's like a random, it was like someone that's killing sex workers, it wouldn't then know to bring her car to like the estranged husband's house, which is a different location.
Exactly.
Like, it's just like, and I kept thinking like, wait, that night was with Uncle Pat. I was with Uncle Pat? And that was, anyway, so I then like, I started talking to like as many people as I could to like gather more of the facts. I contacted the police again. And yeah, then for instance, I didn't have her diary there. Like I didn't even know that the aspect of like he had called to change the time to get her to come on the Sunday night when, and he admitted in a police recorded phone call that I had eventually, yeah, that night you were with Uncle Pat the night that she was killed. Anyway, so now I feel there's overwhelming evidence against him.
Well, how receptive was the police when, after all these years, you just suddenly called them and said you wanted to get info? I mean, how did they react?
So, so of course the police, this was, when I first called them, it was like 25 years later. And no one who I was then talking to had worked the case. But they then pulled out the case file and were looking at, they started to think like, there's a lot of evidence here. And then when they realized I also wasn't my father's alibi,
yes,
the police then wanted the prosecutor to pursue the case. So again, even though it was a new set of police and it was a new prosecutor, it was again the same situation with the police thinking, no, the evidence is really strong. And then there's, these aspects that she can clarify for us now. And not only can she clarify, but through interviewing, like having recorded interviews with her, she's demonstrated that she can remember things that she wouldn't otherwise know unless she had actually remembered them. So that like confirms the, just that other things I'm telling them are, likely to be accurate as well. So yeah, the police, I think the police would be like very receptive to charges.
Kind of a strange question, but did they have any sort of DNA evidence, maybe linking your dad to her, like fingernail?
Oh, yeah. So that's an interesting question because they said that they did have fingernails. So this was in 1982. They didn't have DNA.
Yeah, that was
but
so
they
long
had
ago.
scraping from under her fingernails. I mean, of course, she had been in the water, and I don't know how well it had been preserved since 1982. But they said they sent them off. I mean, this was 10 years ago, and they told me this, and they said we sent off the fingernail scrapings to be evaluated by the FBI, and it's like sitting in a line, waiting to be analyzed.
But that's been 10 years, and no one's gotten back to you.
Yeah. So.
Oh, that's frustrating.
Yeah, the prosecutor said, well, if you told the police and me, well, if you record a phone call and he confesses, a phone call between, me and him, and my father confesses. So we have this phone call. He says all kinds of unusual things. He doesn't exactly write out confess, but then when the police then said, no, the phone call is very incriminating, and he confirms about like the alibi aspect that we were mistaken about. And the prosecutor said, well, even if, this is when I just kind of gave up hope with this prosecutor. He said, well, even if you got an outright confession, because for instance, my father said things like I told him I was afraid of him because I thought he had murdered my mother. And he said, well, I wouldn't do that. You wouldn't do that to your own daughter. Like, not saying, oh, I didn't kill her. It's just like kind of accepting, okay, yeah, I may have killed her, but I wouldn't kill you. Things like that aren't outright confessions. And like, he said, like, if she hadn't been, when I'm asking him, like, I basically saying, I know you did kill her, like, just admit it. He's saying like, well, if she hadn't been murdered, you would be a druggie. And I said, which, I mean, there's just so many layers of nonsense, which we can talk about the layers of nonsense. But again, it's not like, no, I didn't kill her. It's like he's justifying, like, well, he's justifying why it was good for me that she was killed, which is, again,
that it was for your own good.
Yeah, exactly.
Bizarre way to respond.
Yeah, like not the trauma, like the trauma of having my mother killed is more likely to lead to substance use disorder than. And then I did ask him on the phone call then, because he'd always said, oh, druggie. I said, well, what drugs, when I was a kid, I didn't even really just know there's different types of drugs. I said, well, what drugs exactly are you saying that she was taking? And he said, oh, I don't know, marijuana. And in her diary, she wrote about like this one time that she smoked marijuana and she hadn't liked it. And I told, again, when I was just contacting everyone I could get a hold of, a friend of hers from the time had said she absolutely was not, she did not have an addiction. In fact, it was extremely stressful for her and her doctor, going through this divorce. And her doctor had given her sleeping pills, but she didn't want to take them because she was afraid of becoming addicted, and that is not the behavior of someone who is like already addicted to substances.
Yeah, exactly. And your father was claiming she was a quote whore,
Yeah.
Wasn't she working as a social worker or something?
Yeah. She was a social worker. She was, before I was born, she was she'd been a social worker in various capacities, but she was a pediatric social worker at San Francisco General.
Yeah. Well, so you confronted your dad over the phone, and since then, have you talked to him?
No, the last communication I had was he sent me an email, like an angry email after the phone call. Well, so I went out to San Francisco for one phone call, and because like the DA was like, oh, I don't know if that's quite enough, then they asked me to come out. The police asked me to come out for a second phone call. So I went out again, and he didn't answer the phone. But he sent me, but I left a message like that time. And then when I got home from that trip, that unsuccessful trip, he sent me an email that was very, I could pull it up, but he says that his life would be bliss. And then he starts like just cursing kind of in the middle of the email. Like it's, do you want me to, and I never responded to it. And that's the last.
Yeah. Well, but was he mad at you? Did he suspect that you were trying to record him for the police?
I think he not at the point of this email or not the phone call, but I think he did, because the police then went to try to talk to him. he at the point where he sends this email to me, he didn't know it was being recorded, but I'm pretty sure he now knows. And the police had also gone, like, after these police phone calls, they go to talk to him, and he actually like answers the door and said, "Oh yeah, I'll talk to you." But then he had his lawyer. He had a very high powered like legal team. Have you heard of John Kecker?
Well, now I have, because I've gone back and read some of the articles.
Oh yeah, you see, he's like really celebrity lawyer.
So your dad had the money to hire some hot shot. That's attorney.
Yeah. He had a significant legal team that his sister helped coordinate, and she was also working on it.
So did the police or the DA have some sort of final meeting with you, or they just flat out told you that they're not going to move forward with the case?
That what I've been describing has all been with the Foster City Police. Oh, but I should explain because her body, she was murdered in San Francisco, but her body was dumped in the bay at, I guess, a point in the water where it's actually under Foster City's jurisdiction. Bay between San Francisco and Foster City, across the bridge there. And actually initially, I guess both Foster City and San Francisco police, like when they came to the house, they both came, and it could be pursued by either San Francisco or Foster City. So it was the San Mateo DA who, asked for the police to record phone calls. Then we met with him. The police and I met with him, and of course he's now retired. Actually, it was some like misconduct or something I saw, and he's no longer. There is a new generation of DAs again, so that's why I'm, I don't know, hopeful that one may still have a different opinion. But yeah, this person, he said, oh, well, just what I mentioned, like, oh, even if he confessed, he'll just say, oh, he was pressured by his daughter to make the confession. And
what kind of excuse is that?
You asked me to come across the country for this, and then that's what you needed to file the charges. He saw these incriminating things, and he said, well, and also he can just say, well, yeah, I hated her, but because he said things like that in the phone call. I hated her, but that doesn't mean I killed her. And so I'm like, and I asked the prosecutor, did you even listen to the phone call? And it seemed like he hadn't listened. So I just thought, like, why? He's just like kind of humoring me and the police to all these efforts, and he's not. It just was clear he's not going to pursue it. Like, and then I hired a lawyer who contacted Brosnahan, who contacted a homicide prosecutor in San Francisco, and that prosecutor was going. And I went out to interview with him as well. He was basically going to file charges, but then he got like appointed as a judge, and he told like Jim, like, oh, I'm excited I just got appointed as a judge, but you should, like, don't give up on this case though. Obviously I'm not a prosecutor anymore, I'm a judge. But I think this case should be pursued. So you should, try to get another DA another prosecutor in the San Francisco office to pursue it. So then we wrote to, and this person's in the news right now. Gascon was the, he was the head DA in San Francisco, and he's in the news because he's now basically he's not very popular. A lot of people I'm sure there's a difference of opinion, but I've just heard people from San Francisco describe like, oh, he messed up the San Francisco, and then he went down to LA to run for DA there, and yeah, he was elected there, but they've tried to recall him like 3 times in LA. Anyway, he's in the news right now because of the Menendez brother, and not the so, but so Gascon was we wrote to Gascon, and he said, oh, you can meet with my like deputy. And so we did, we met, and then I got a letter. We met and kind of laid out this evidence. And then I got a letter from, one of his, is deputy the right term? Saying that they weren't going to pursue the case. So, I mean, of course, there is like Gascon. He's no longer in San Francisco. There was, the misconduct from the prosecutor in San Mateo. So there is a new generation of prosecutors, and there's no statute of limitations on murder.
Well, have you looked at all the evidence in the investigative file?
So,
were you allowed to do that?
I mean, the police. I don't know everything. The police, on the one hand, they said, they definitely indicated like, the sleeping bag. They did indicate a lot of like how accurate things were. So your question, you were asking me about the
like how did it end? How did they tell you that they weren't going to pursue it?
Yeah, they sent a letter that they weren't going to pursue it, but Gascon's office. And you asked me about have I seen the file? So I'd hired a private investigator, and they allowed him to come in and read the file and not take anything with him. They did supply me with the copies of everything that was technically like my mother's written property. So like her diary, that's how I got a copy of her diary, like and like a letter that had been sent to her. And yeah, the private investigator was allowed to like read through everything, and because he was also trying to like find these witnesses again. So there was some cooperation, and then he told me everything that he thought was significant, but because there could still be a trial and I would be a witness, presumably, like, they didn't just, I think it's not, they do still keep like things close to the vest. But that, I think if anything, the police just indicated to me that there's even more than like than I'm aware of that is incriminating.
And that's so frustrating, because if there's more, then why don't they go ahead and arrest him or charge him with something? Because didn't you say your dad's 80 years old now?
Yeah, he's in his yeah.
Uh-huh. Does he live by himself?
Yeah, he does. Yeah, in San Francisco.
Oh, okay. But you totally cut contact with him a long time ago.
Yeah.
Right? As both your children.
Yeah, that's right. He never met Emily or Evan. And I mean, Sarah, he just met her one time, and when she was an infant. She doesn't remember. And in fact, the girls in particular, because I've been writing a memoir, which Sarah's read, and she says the girls really want me to publish it. Like they're not. I always felt shame about being both the daughter of both a murder victim and a murderer. But I'm happy that my children don't feel that way, and they actually want to see like the truth exposed. They want my memoir to be published. Yeah. So.
Yeah, because this is kind of like what you would like to do to, fight for your mother, because you're the voice that's left.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah. Well, I also read online that for a while you kept your mother's clothes and you would wear her coat.
Oh yeah, I
So,
still have it.
yeah. So how did you get her clothes? I mean, that's interesting that you had them.
Yeah, there were still, well, my my father didn't throw away a lot of her belongings. And like for instance, the Buick. Like if nothing else, you would have thought he'd sell a Buick and drive. He loved his Mercedes until then he decided to sell it and drive her Buick. So yeah, I like for instance her coat. I still have her coat. And I have her bathrobe, her green bathrobe still. And so I have quilts that she used to like make quilts herself.
Mm-hmm. Well, I guess that's one nice thing is that your father didn't just throw everything out and destroy them. So you still have a few mementos.
Yeah.
And what about the diary? Did you have to just leave that with the police?
Well, the police still have the original copy, and they sent me like photocopy of it.
Yeah. So it must have been pretty shocking to read it with all the
Yeah.
details. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially the entry that I didn't realize that she called and asked him and said he had told her he had to go to town on business, and he didn't. That was a lie. Like, you see, I don't think she hadn't been keeping a diary until towards the end of their marriage, and so and she was very gregarious and he is not. And I think it almost didn't occur to him that she would be keeping a diary or telling like all these friends that she was going to go pick me up. Like he just assumed that there wouldn't be anyone to contradict like his version.
Yeah. I also recall you said that at least one of his relatives told you that they suspected your dad did it. So how did your relationships with relatives change?
So I may have been referring to, was I referring to,
Maybe
because,
an aunt or your grandmother? Maybe your
oh, well, my
paternal grandmother?
mother's mother, but also my father. So she thought but then also my, my, my aunt who represented my father. I have two aunts, but, he had two sisters, has two sisters. Her well, now ex-husband told me that she would call, and when she was down there representing him, and she would vacillate between, oh my God, I don't know what to do. He's guilty. I think he actually did do it. And then she'd call the next day and be like, no, he couldn't have done it. Like she was kind of flipping in and out of denial. And my her children, so cousins told me like when they were adults that well, one of them himself is a lawyer and he told me that she had said that was the hardest time of her life, was representing him, and that even though she's always told me, oh no, he's not guilty, but she told her son, who told me that she said, and I don't even know if he's innocent. Like, so she has that doubt. And then her husband at the time, he, a few years after the murder, he was in town in San Francisco and had dinner with that Uncle Pat person. And Uncle Pat told him, Allison was with me that night. And Ed, my uncle, called his wife and said, I just heard that Uncle Pat says that Allison was with him, not with Pat, not with, my father, Pat. And I think his wife, even though she'd represented my father, honestly, at that point, or until that point, did not realize that I wasn't my father's alibi, my father's actual alibi. And she said to Ed told me, she said, like, don't ever tell anyone that. But, then when I was asking around, he said, asking around in my 30s, he said, when I told him I think he's guilty, he said, oh, I don't want you to think that, but yes, I think he is guilty. And then there's, for instance, like a cousin, a more distant cousin, I guess it would be his cousin. So like, I guess I would, second cousin to me. I mean, there's a number of people in the more distant family, like basically kind of his cousins, that think that he's guilty.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And is that Uncle Pat still alive?
Oh, no, he's not. So you see, like, that's an example, although it is confirmed in the recorded phone call, like from Pat himself.
Yeah. I mean, I'm just thinking, like, what can be done? I mean, the whole holdup with the FBI, what can possibly be done about it? Because you're saying this DNA testing hasn't been completed for 10 years.
I actually don't know the status, because that was told to my private investigator, and I don't know if it was, they analyzed it and there was no DNA because it had been such a long time. Although this was 10 years ago, so techniques have even improved actually dramatically since then. My husband, who's a geneticist, he's he does cancer genetics, and he, like, 10 years ago, he said, I don't think, based on the techniques then, I think, like, given she was in the water, and this is, if it also depending on how it, if it wasn't, it's unlikely that it was preserved well enough that you would be able to get usable DNA. But now he says, now techniques have improved so much that, so potentially, I just don't know the status. Like, did it just sit in the line? Is it still sitting in the line? Did it get analyzed back then, but there was nothing there? But it could still be analyzed now with the new techniques that have improved so much. So I would knowing the status of that.
Yeah. And also, I just thought of another thing. Did they ever take the Buick and test the fibers? Try to.
Yeah, they did.
Okay. Did they find anything in the cars?
I heard there were. All I know is that there were analysis of fibers. I heard, not from the police, but I heard that there was some carpeting they'd removed, and then they had not. This is kind of more of a rumor, that this is again from my uncle. Like, they'd put it on. They had gotten wet when it was in the police possession. Like, they left. I guess it was a big carpet they'd rolled up, and there is fiber analysis, but I just don't know the results. Like, that's like in the, when the police are indicating there's more incriminating things, maybe there are fibers that match, because all I know is that there was fiber analysis, and that there is more incriminating evidence even that I'm not aware of. But I don't know precisely what the fiber analysis was.
Yeah. Well, I mean, do you think that maybe you could contact the DA's office again to see what's going on? Because it's sort of like squeaky wheel gets the grease.
I know. I had given up on it when it just felt there was no option 10 years ago. But now, just like the last couple months, I've been thinking, well, no, it's a new generation now of prosecutors and DNA techniques. And I think I will.
Since we have a tiny community of people who are kind of watching a bunch of different cases, so who knows, maybe we could do a petition or something.
Oh, that would be
whatever we can do to help.
No, thank you so much. That would be amazing. Because, one of my frustrations with Gascon is apparently he's very responsive to politics. And I don't want to make a comment about the Menendez, situation, except that nothing has changed in the last, for instance, year or two in the Menendez case, except that there was this Netflix dramatization. And then, that Gascon admitted himself in this recent press conference, there's this Netflix and I'm getting all these calls and now I'm looking at the evidence again. It's so it just shows that public pressure, and that was the person who also said, I'm not going to pursue it. So I know that person is influenced by, he's no longer relevant to my mother's case.
Netflix. So we got to try to get a Netflix documentary about your mom in order for
I'm not
something to happen.
I'm not saying that either, but it's just, it does demonstrate the public, it just feels like everything should be about the evidence, and it shouldn't be about who can afford these fancy lawyers or
who's attractive for TV.
Yeah, exactly. And every victim is equally important. But you're in a practical sense, public attention makes a big difference in cases like this.
Yeah, and it's too bad you're not there anymore, because if you lived right there and you had a bunch of concerned citizens, then they would probably pay more attention. Do you think? Yeah, but we should do what we can. I mean, what's wrong with doing a petition? They could just toss it aside if they don't want to care about it, or or even just making some phone calls or email or something. Yeah, because don't they have what do they call it? Cold case files divisions?
Foster City is, I'm not sure the different, I know there's less attention on cold cases in general, even though there's no statute of limitations on, and I don't exactly know the structure in San Francisco. There's this, one of my heroes is John Lewin. Do you know him in LA? He only does cold cases, and he prosecuted Robert Durst, who physically kind of reminds me, and in his mannerisms remind me of my father. And they're even though I think, it was a similar, decades had passed since Robert Durst had murdered his wife. And again, he was a wealthy person, Robert Durst, someone with means like my father. And John Lewin did such a thorough job on that case. I actually contacted John Lewin and I said, oh my gosh, I wish I had, my mother had a prosecutor like you. And he actually told me, yeah, you should contact the San Mateo homicide prosecutor again.
Sure. Because, at least some of your mom's friends are still alive and your dad's still alive. So, why not?
Yeah.
Because, you're definitely a very busy person with 3 kids and 3 dogs or something. But, I don't know. I mean, do you feel psychologically ready to, try to stir up something again after what happened?
Yeah, I do actually. I do feel,
Mhm.
I mean, I was back 10 years ago.
Mhm.
If anything, I think I have more time now because the kids were little.
Yeah, exactly. I have some time.
And yeah, and then I just, my hopes were dashed. But now with, talking to John Lewin and him encouraging me, John Lewin went to UC Hastings in San Francisco. So I was like, oh, if
Right.
only he stayed in San Francisco. Instead, he moved to LA because his wife was doing her residency there or something like that. I'm like, oh, darn.
Oh, okay, interesting. Yeah. Well, we'll talk over some ideas in the background, because I don't have any power over there. I used to live there, but that was ages ago. So, yeah. But it just gets to me that your dad basically got away with
Yeah.
murder. Like the only thing that you can get at him with is the fact that you you have cut him off and he has no relationship with his grandchildren. So,
Mhm.
I mean, do you think he's really hurt by that? How do you think he feels about what
No, I
happened?
don't think he's that hurt by it. But that last email that he sent me, he said that it's been one of the happiest, because I was estranged from him for a while before that police recorded phone call. And he said that since I haven't been in his life has been one of the happiest times of his life, and that it would be bliss if it weren't for this. And then he says like this fucking, and he starts like saying fucking condo, da da da. So anyway, he claimed it would be bliss. But again, like you see his temper just kind of erupt even in this email.
Yeah, so in a way, do you feel kind of relieved to not have him in your life anymore?
Oh, I mean, that I certainly am. I hadn't even considered the idea like I could still have him in my life. I'm so happy he's not in my life. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, this brings to mind the message that you put together for Rob Adelson recently. Did you ever hear from him?
Oh, he did. He did. He did receive the letter, and
Message?
he sent a very nice response back that it meant a lot to him.
Yeah. Yeah, because unfortunately, it seems like a lot of people have been through some similar trauma. And even just doing this YouTube channel, sometimes I hear people talking about how they felt like the Rob of their family, or, they had a mom that was like Donna. And I mean, I guess you also feel some sort of kinship with Dan's children too.
Yes, like their story absolutely resonates with me, and I feel like it's very similar in the sense that although their mother hasn't been convicted, as mine hasn't, I think their mother was involved. She's definitely complicit, and I think there's overwhelming evidence against my father as well. But my father evaded justice, as thus far Wendy has, and she's continuing to raise her boys as my father did. And he always said how much he loved me, and I think that's probably the message that they've received from the Adelson family, that but it's not love. They may be mistaken as narcissists and think that it's love, but
Do you sort of identify with Dan Markel's children based on what you've gone through?
yes, very much so. Their story resonates with me, having one parent be complicit in the murder of the other parent, and then for that parent to evade justice, as Wendy and my father thus far have. And to be then raised by people who profess to love you, it's not loving to, this sounds so obvious, but to inflict the trauma on your children of having that other parent murdered. Dan was a extremely devoted, loving father. Everyone, for that matter, even Wendy admits that. And well, it's an understatement to say that the needs of Dan's children were not paramount to their other side of the family.
The selfish desire for Donna to have the kids close to her so she could raise them.
Yeah. And, there's this rationalization that my father does, which is probably a different, not necessarily the same rationalization that's happening, I would guess, with the Adelson family. But, my father saying that I'm better off because I would be a druggie and I wouldn't have gone to England to boarding school, when it's so perverse. And to think that it's not going to be more traumatic and scarring. Then to be left with I think it's by definition a narcissistic parent that is willing for their own selfish reasons to murder the other parent.
Well, I mean, I'm so glad that it seems like you have overcome this big, huge, I don't know, traumatic incident in your life to, to have a loving family. And do you think you had some good female role models who sort of took the place of your mother?
Well, I just on the aspect of like overcoming it, I don't think that I think I'll always be affected by it. Like, I don't think I'll ever really like fully overcome the trauma. But in terms of role models, I had maternal crushes like on teachers. And then I also, there was an ex-boyfriend's mother who I became really close to, and she was almost like a mother figure to me. In fact, like even after we broke up, like he was like a brother to me. Like for the rest of they have now passed away, but the rest of their lives, like they were like family.
Well, that's nice to hear that. Yeah. Okay. Well, unfortunately, it's getting close to 2 hours, so I have to get going and stuff. But I mean, this has been really informative to hear about, this whole thing that happened to you and your family. So, if there's some idea of what we can do, like I said, a petition or something. And I wish my voice were better so I could do better videos on live streams and stuff. But, we'll do what we can given our limitations. So,
thank you so much, Judy.
Yeah.
I really appreciate your your time and covering it and your compassion.
Sorry, my voice is going. It's been a long day with work and stuff. So, yeah. So we'll go ahead and say goodbye to the audience here. Thank you guys so much for caring. And why don't you stay on for a minute or so we can say goodbye. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.